The Glossary of Old New Zealand, being Incidents of Native Customs and Character in the Old Times, by Frederick Edward Maning. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Glossary. A Pakeha tutua, a mean, poor European, first mentioned in chapter 2. Be Motiti. The island of Motiti is often called Motiti Wahi Kori, as descriptive of the want of timber or bareness of the island. A more fiercely contested battle, perhaps, was never fought than that on Motiti, in which the Ngati Kuri were destroyed. Mentioned in chapter 11. E aha te pai. What is the good or use of him? Said in contempt. Mentioned in chapter 2. Haere mai. Sufficiently explained as the native call of welcome. It is literally an invitation to advance. First mentioned in chapter 1. Hahunga. A hahunga is a funeral ceremony at which the natives usually assembled in great numbers, and during which baked meats were disposed of with far less economy than Hamlet gives us to suppose was observed in Denmark. Chapter 1. Jackie Poto, Short Jack or Stumpy Jack, mentioned in chapter 11. Kainga, a native town or village, their principal headquarters, first mentioned in chapter 1. Kia kotahi ki te ao, kia kotahi ki te po. A close translation would not give the meaning to the English reader. By these words the dying person is conjured to cling to life, but as they are never spoken until the person to whom they are addressed is actually expiring, they seem to me to contain a horrid mockery, though to the native they no doubt appear the promptings of an affectionate and anxious solicitude. They are also supposed to contain a certain mystical meaning. Mentioned in chapter 14. Ki au te mataika. I have the mataika. The first man killed in a battle is called the mataika. To kill the mataika. To kill the mataika, or first man, was counted a very high honour, and the most extraordinary exertions were made to obtain it. The writer once saw a young warrior, when rushing with his tribe against the enemy, rendered almost frantic by perceiving that another section of the tribe would, in spite of all his efforts, be engaged first, and gain the honour of killing the mataika. In this emergency, he, as he rushed on, cut down with a furious blow of his tomahawk a sapling which stood in his way, and gave the cry which claims the mataika. After the battle, the circumstances of this question in Maori chivalry having been fully considered by the elder warriors, it was decided that the sapling tree should, in this case, be held to be the true mataika, and that the young man who cut it down should always claim without question to have killed, or, as the natives say, caught, the mataika of that battle. First mentioned in chapter 13. Mana. As the meaning of this word is explained in the course of the narrative, it is only necessary to say that in the sense in which it is used here, it means dominion or authority. Mere pounamu. A native weapon made of a rare greenstone, and much valued by the natives. First mentioned in chapter 2. Nā mati rawa. This is the battle cry by which a warrior proclaims exultingly and tauntingly the death of one of the enemy. First mentioned in chapter 3. No hei. Literally, from whence? often used as a negative answer to an inquiry, in which case the words mean that the thing inquired for is not, or in fact is nowhere. First mentioned in Chapter 1. Pakeha, an Englishman, a foreigner. First mentioned in Chapter 1. Rangatira, a chief, a gentleman, a warrior. Rangatira Pakeha, a foreigner who is a gentleman, not a tutua or nobody, as described above, a rich foreigner. First mentioned in Chapter 1. Tangi, a dirge, or song of lamentation for the dead. It was a custom for the mourners, when singing the tangi, to cut themselves severely on the face, breast, and arms, with sharp flints and shells, in token of their grief. This custom is still practised, though in a mitigated form. In past times the mourners cut themselves dreadfully, and covered themselves with blood from head to feet. See a description of a tangi further on. First mentioned in Chapter 1. Taniwha, a sea monster, more fully described further on. First mentioned in Chapter 11. Toonga, goods or property. First mentioned in Chapter 1. Taua, a war party or war expedition. First mentioned in Chapter 3. Tēnā koutou, or Tēnara kokoto, the Maori form of salutation, equivalent to our "How do you do?" First mentioned in Chapter 3. Tino tangata, a good man, in the language of the prize ring, a warrior, or literally a very or perfect man. First mentioned in Chapter 3. Toa, a warrior of preeminent courage, a hero. First mentioned in Chapter 13. Tōrere, an unfathomable cave or pit in the Rocky Mountains, where the bones of the dead, after remaining a certain time in the first burying place, are removed to and thrown in, and so finally disposed of. First mentioned in Chapter 5. Tu ngā rahu. This is a muster or review made to ascertain the numbers and condition of a native force, generally made before the starting of an expedition. It is also often held as a military spectacle or exhibition of the force of a tribe when they happen to be visited by strangers of importance. The war dance is done through on these occasions, and speeches declaratory of war or welcome, as the case may be, made to the visitors. The review of the Taniwha witnessed by the Ngāti Kuri was possibly a herd of sea lions or sea elephants, animals scarcely ever seen on the coast of that part of New Zealand, and therefore, from their strange and hideous appearance, at once set down as an army of Taniwha. One man only was, at the defeat of the Ngāti Kuri at Motiti, rescued to tell the tale. Mentioned in Chapter 6. Tūpara, a double gun, an article in the old times valued by the natives above all other earthly riches. Mentioned in Chapter 1. Tutua, a low, worthless, and above all a poor fellow, a nobody. First mentioned in Chapter 2. Utu, revenge or satisfaction, also payment. First mentioned in Chapter 2. End of the glossary. End of Old New Zealand, being Incidents of Native Customs and Character in the Old Times, by Frederick Edward Maning.